In October 2020, I had a conversation with Ian Small about the future of Evernote. It was published in my channel in Portuguese because at that point, this channel didn't exist. If we look back, it's astonishing how Evernote has changed in less than 1 year. To give you some perspective, at that point, Evernote 10 was just released and Home didn't even exist. I invite you to go back in time with me and watch Ian Small promising us releases like never before in Evernote history. I guess we can say he kept his word.
It's really an honor to have you here with us.
More than welcome and happy to join you.
Great. Look, I was going through all the posts and behind the scene videos again for this interview, and I found the first thing you wrote when you came to Evernote. You just wrote, "Hi, I'm Ian Small. Today is my first day at Evernote as CEO of Evernote." This was almost 2 years ago, 29th of October 2018. I would like to know one little thing. If you could go back, is there anything you would do differently now that you know everything that you passed through a lot of things?
Well, I think maybe if I could go back, I might have said it was going to take 18 months, not a year. But uh, I think when we started this process, I mean, I was pretty clear when we set out to do what we're doing that the goal here was to really rebuild Evernote and create a new platform on which we could innovate and bring new features and new capabilities to our customers. And we knew that was going to be a really, really, really big lift. It was going to be a lot of work, and that part didn't surprise us at all. I think it clearly took longer than we wanted it to take, and it took longer than we said it was going to take. But looking back over those 18 months, almost 20 now, I think there isn't anything where we went down a bad alley and spent 4 months like doing something that we had to throw out and start again. There was just more work than we could estimate at the beginning to actually get done. I mean, if there's anything I could change over the last year and a half, it would obviously be not the things that have anything to do with Evernote. It would be, coronavirus and pandemic and global economy, shaking and all those things. And because those affect all of us and it affected us, but that's actually, been probably the most stressful part of the last year and a half.
Sure. But would you say that you underestimate the work, or a lot of things that came out that you didn't know about?
I think there's two parts there. Sometimes when a project is this big and you have to undertake it, you don't spend 3 months at the beginning trying to figure out just how big it is.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to rebuild the house because you can't do what you need to do with it otherwise, then at some point you stop estimating how much work it's going to be to rebuild the house because you need to rebuild it anyway, and you just get on with it. We didn't have like a detailed plan for all the things that we would have to do to get this done, because making that detailed plan would have taken us 3 months, and that's just kind of wasting 3 months. We would have had maybe a better idea of how long it was going to take, but then it would have taken 3 months longer because we'd spent 3 months, building that detailed plan. So, we knew we needed to do this, and we basically just started doing the work. And, some of it ended up being harder than we thought it would be. And there just ended up being more pieces that we needed to get to than we necessarily thought up front. And some of it just took longer. It's all those three things kind of came together, I think, to put the extra, 6 to 9 months on the process.
I see. And you mentioned earlier the pandemic. Did that also impact in the?
I mean, I think the pandemic. I mean, look, from the standpoint of leading a company in 2020 as a CEO, having nothing to do with Evernote, this has been a really, really difficult year. And any company leader would tell you that. because the pandemic has nothing to do with your company. It has to do with the world that everybody lives in. And usually, companies manage through problems where employees, may be dealing with a lot of stress at work, but they get to go home and leave that stress at work, try to leave that stress at work. Right now, that stress is everywhere, and it's
Always with us.
It's always with us, right? It's not like, it's not like I can go home and leave the stress at work. First of all, I'm working from home, so I don't get to go home. And second of all, the stress is there in my work life, in my personal life, for my family,
Yeah.
For my relatives, for my friends. And, that's got a real cost on people. From the standpoint of doing the work, I can't point to coronavirus and say, "Oh, that slowed us down and cost us 3 months." That wouldn't necessarily be true. I think as a software company, we were pretty well equipped to adapt rapidly. I don't think it helped. It hasn't. Oh, we haven't worked faster because everybody's working from home now, but it hasn't been like a hugely material impact. What it has impacted is, really the sort of general state of being of the people who work in the company, and that does have an impact, right? Life is now much more complicated for everybody. They might have kids at home while they're trying to work, and they're trying to have their kids, going to school from home while they're at home, and
the dog.
And yes, the dog who came and visited the last behind the scenes video. Camera wasn't low enough to see them, but these are the kinds of things, and those have a real cost, and those have a real impact. They add stress, they add diversion, but that's just the world right now, and we all have to deal with it. I think it also has had an impact on things like the videos, right? I mean, it's much harder for us to shoot behind the scenes videos when we're all shooting from our houses, and we don't have a studio here, and I don't have a big monitor that I can point to and do demos, and like all that stuff that we used to do becomes much harder to do in this context. And those were some of the things that I think suffered a little bit. We did put out one because there was something we could just kind of talk to, but we didn't. Of all the things we chose to spend time on in the middle of this, we didn't choose to spend time. Okay, let's figure out how to recreate these videos when we're all shooting from home and directing from home and trying to do all those kinds of things. Those are places that I think suffer a little bit.
Yeah. And I remember I visited the office once, and I remember it's all open, so it must be affecting people. It was a very nice. It is a very nice place to work. I imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, all of our offices, look like that. Very open concept. People working together. I mean, like a disaster for a virus to spread in. There's like no separation. There's no walls. There's there's nothing like that. And I don't obviously. It's taking a long time, here in the U.S. to really get in control of it, just like in Brazil. And so, I think it'll be a while before we're back in the office.
Yes. Well, let's talk a little bit about Ian, small user of Evernote. That's what I want to know, because I know a lot about Evernote. I know a lot about behind the scenes, but I don't know a lot about you. So, first question: are you Team Notebook or Team Tag?
Well, I love all my teams equally. That's important. But, I've often talked about the fact that, I mean, years ago, when I was at Apple, we did some research about how people organized. And it wasn't about how they used a computer to organize. It was about how they organized in their life. And we came up with this realization that in this world, there are filers, there are pilers, and there are searchers. I'm pretty much a filer. I like the sense of organization, of putting things away. And so for me, I use notebooks a lot more than I use tags. I use tags occasionally for something that is orthogonal, or runs at a different dimension to my kind of notebook filing scheme. But I'm absolutely, from the notebook side. But I absolutely recognize that, the people who use tags, that is to them as obvious a way to organize things as notebooks are for me, because it has to do with how your brain wants to think about things. And if we are going to try to be your external brain, then it makes sense that we should try and work the way that you want to work. So personally, I use notebooks, probably 90% notebooks, 10% tags.
But you tag the notes with like a subject or not even that?
So I have a few areas where my notes are spread across notebooks because of my filing scheme, and I still want to be able to group them. So when I have a note that relates to that, I tag it with that topic, and then I have this kind of way to cut across my notes. But I don't tag every note. There's just a few things that I like to track that way.
Okay.
I don't tag every note religiously.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing I do. I prefer the note. I don't know. I like the structure, and I like to say like a compartment. I have everything in a box and the tags to cross-reference.
It's entirely about how your brain works. I think over the last 10 years, a lot of us have had our brains rewired by the power of search and the fact that you get used to using Google just to find things. And if you look at what Gmail is about, or how Google Drive works, they're very, very reliant on search as the one true way to find things. And one of the things we've tried to do in these builds is make search significantly more powerful, so that for those people for whom organization isn't one of the things that makes them smile, we can do a better job of finding things for them.
I'm sure my wife will love that, because she doesn't use notebooks, tags, nothing. Just search.
She's a searcher.
She's a searcher. Not only on Evernote, the computer, everywhere. Everything is search.
Yep.
And I imagine, of course, you guys are using Evernote to take notes during the meetings. Do you take notes per meeting, one note per meeting? Do you use the same note? How do you use a template? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I tend to make one note per meeting,
okay,
rather than making one long continuous note, for all a series. In other words, each week that I have a regular meeting, I have a new note that covers that meeting, instead of one note per meeting type that I just keep adding to and have a long scrolling history of the meeting. And the reason for that is that when I'm looking for something in the history, I don't want to have to scroll way down, in the note to try and find that stuff. I want to just be able to get to it quickly. So I tend to like having lots of smaller notes more than big long chronologies in a single note.
So I'm guessing you keep the notebook or order by creation, newest first.
Well, there's a couple of things, but yes, I go further, which is I tend to put the dates in the note titles for repeating meetings.
You know that you don't need to do that, right?
I know I don't need to do that, but it creates the context when I'm looking at the note itself, because the date is super important to me. So the titles tend to give me the automatic chronological ordering, even if the system didn't. And that's because when I'm looking at the note, I want to be able to see in an instant, what meeting that was, and the title is much more obvious than the date stamp, which is smaller and more less obvious. But that's just me again, right? These are the habits. These are the habits you bring to the product, and there's lots of different ways to do that. So I attend meetings in the company where the meeting organizer keeps one long meeting note, right? So it's like, it depends whether they're my personal notes that I keep for myself, or they're the group note for that meeting. And so, I live in both worlds. We have a lot of meetings where there's kind of a group note, and those tend to be one note for 3 years of meeting.
Wow. So how do you come back to a note to talk? Say you had something a person had to do, and you have a checklist, because I know now you're a checklist guy. So you have a check, you go back to that note, or you reference it, you link the notes. What do you do?
I do a couple of things. So I tend to actually keep a centralized list of the most important things that I need to be doing. And that's sort of the center of my life, is a single list that I have sort of my outstanding items on. All the small stuff gets kind of scattered around. And then the fact that I get back to it generally every week in these repeating meetings means I have a mechanism for going back and looking at what was done before. So when I go into a meeting, one of the first things I'm doing, or to prepare for the meeting, is looking at the last week's meeting to see what was supposed to be done, and then moving forward from that to create the agenda for this week's meeting and to check in on things. For myself, I maintain a single rolling to-do list inside my Evernote, which I archive once a month, and I keep that list updated in priority order.
It's a list in a note, in a single note.
In a single note, yeah.
Okay.
And it's because I want to look at one place. So and what happens is, sort of at the end of every day, I sweep anything that I made somewhere else as something that's important for me, and I go and I put it in this note, and I prioritize it. Because the biggest thing for me is there's always more things I'm supposed to be doing than there's time to do. And my life is about prioritizing what's going to get done and what's not, on a personal level, right? Because there's just stuff that doesn't, even though I'd like to do it, even though it would be a good idea, there's not time to do it. And so I start the beginning of every week by actually looking at that list and resorting it based on what's now most important. Because some things that were important last week, now that they didn't get done, they're no longer important.
Yes.
They get pushed down, or more important things come up, and those things just get pushed down. So I'm always able to look at that list and know that what I can see in the first 10 or 20 items are the most important things. And there's more. I can keep scrolling. I mean, by the end of a month, this list is very, very long. And what happens is, as things get checked off, I move them to the bottom of the list. And then at the end of the month, all I do is I duplicate the list, create an archive copy of it, and then cut off everything that's been done. So the history goes away, and I start every month with only the things that have not yet been done.
I like that. I never heard about that. That's really interesting. And I talked to a lot of people that use Evernote. That's quite. But now I know why the checkbox suddenly can be moved top down.
Honestly, that wasn't done for me, but I do not object to it. I think the ability to move around blocks of checklist items in hierarchies is super useful. But the team was actually already on that before I joined the company, so you can't blame that one on me.
Okay, I'll try to believe that. And what about your? I'm not going to go into your personal life, but I'd like to know, you like to read, play games, go to movies. What can you do right now in this pandemic? But
well,
what do you do when you're not planning the Evernote future?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this year with the pandemic, there hasn't been much else, and that's been because what we're trying to do at Evernote is super important, and we were trying to get to the end, and it's required like a lot of focus. But it's also because managing a company while working remotely is more work than it is when you can walk around an office and see half your company face to face, like every day. And so the hours for me are certainly much longer this year. So there's been a lot less time. So what do I do for fun is kind of more work. But when there is time, one of my problems is my brain never shuts off thinking about work. I've my whole life I've never been able to leave work at work. I'm always, super focused on work, and being in the technology industry, it's kind of a privilege to be able to do for a living something that you love doing. And so I can't complain about not being able to stop thinking about it. It's not a bad thing. There's only a few things that make me stop thinking about work, and one of them is reading, because I get really absorbed into reading fiction. And the other is actually using power tools, because I have found that if I am using a tool that's going to cut off my hand if I use it incorrectly, then I pay a lot of attention to what I'm doing. And so I spend a fair amount of time working on parts of my house or my garden or what have you, because when I'm doing that, I stop thinking about work. And people are like, you can get somebody in to do that. I said, yes, but then I'll just think about work the whole time. So if I do it myself, I won't think about work. Those are really two things I do for fun.
That's a good. You mean science fiction or just fiction? Just fiction in general.
Fiction, but I do read a lot of science fiction. I read a lot of science fiction. I read a lot of kind of spy novels and things like that. That kind of class of stuff. I would say right now probably 70% science fiction.
Okay. Well, let's go back a little bit to Evernote. I was reading a post of yours in January 2019, and you were writing about the possible new features in Evernote, and you guys were starting to think about it. And that caught my attention because that's what I would like to know. I'm sure you're not going to talk a lot about it, but I'm going to try. You can blame me for trying, right?
I can't blame you for trying.
Okay. So even if you don't go into details that I'm sure you're not going, but what is your vision? Are we going to get stuck to the Note core, or are we going beyond that? For example, I'm agile evangelist. I like tables. I like the Trello mode. Do you think that's something possible? The connection between notes, I love to connect notes. Is there anything that we can expect powerful in this connection? Just a vision, if you can point us to a direction.
Yeah. So let me tell you how we are thinking about Evernote and its place in the world at the moment. When Stepan Pachikov founded Evernote, he had a very simple vision, which is he wanted to be your external brain. And
super simple.
Super simple. Now, the good thing about that vision is there's a lot of room in there. You don't really have to change that. It's not like, we need a bigger vision. That's big enough. But in Evernote's early years, and for much of its history, that vision got boiled down to a sort of simple mantra, which was, remember everything. And so that was why there was all this focus at Evernote on capturing things, notes and scans and pictures and web clips and all the rest, because we took the idea of being your external brain and we translated it into, we're going to help you remember. And that's a really good mission. But we think, these days, remembering is probably not enough. We've always believed that what is important about Evernote isn't Evernote itself; it's what people do with Evernote. It's what our users do with this tool that we give them that is the most important thing about Evernote. And if you kind of go around the world and you talk to Evernote users, you will find everything. You could name a use case, and you can go find someone who is doing that with Evernote.
Yes.
We literally have researchers who are curing cancer and using Evernote to figure out how to keep their notes. We have people who are figuring out, they're selling houses, they're realtors. They're using Evernote to help them do that. We have people who are running companies and using Evernote to do that. We have people who are running their kids' soccer teams and using Evernote to do that. We have people who are cooking and using Evernote for recipes. So every possible use case you could imagine is in Evernote, and all of that is what's important about Evernote. But in most of these cases, remembering is useful, but we don't think it's enough given where the world is today. And so we used to talk about remember everything.
Okay.
These days, we're starting to talk about remember everything and accomplish anything. And what we really want to do is start to shift Evernote from a place that is just a place that helps you remember things into a tool that can really help you accomplish things. So yes, we'll still be helping you remember, but now we want to help you take that information and turn it in some way into action or result. And that's really still completely focused on being your external brain, just starting to bite off a few more pieces of what that brain really means. And so, note taking is obviously a lot about remembering. And one of the things I think we want to start to help do is, as you say, help organize those ideas so that you can get results, help you turn those actions into results, help you think better using Evernote. These are all things that I think are now stuff we're trying to think about, because really what we've been doing for these last 18 months is trying not just to rebuild these apps, but to create a foundation on which we can innovate. And if we're going to innovate, we need to know what we're going after. And what we're going after is helping move Evernote just from being about remembering to being a tool that's about accomplishing as well.
Well, you didn't talk about features, but I love the answer. That was a great answer. I wasn't expecting that. That was a great answer. Thank you for that. Oh, and talking about features, but one that not features, but a version, the Linux version. Please don't think I'm complaining here. I love the idea that you have a Linux version, but what I don't understand is why a Linux version now. I've been related to the company like since 2008. I used to tell everybody, I don't believe Evernote will ever release a Linux version. So why? What's happening?
Well, ever is a very long time, and you should be careful about the word ever. I think,
Great point.
We set out these last, 18 months to do three things, right? One was to create a more coherent and consistent experience for Evernote. And you know that if you use Evernote on a Windows machine and you use Evernote on an iPhone, it's like apps from two different companies. You don't use one and then know how to use the other. It's like you have to learn each app all over again.
Used to be, right? Used to be like that.
And so what we wanted to do was fix that and start to get to the point that Evernote made sense for the device it was on and was adapted to whatever that device was. Obviously, phones have small screens, and you touch them, and computers have large screens, and you use mouse or trackpads and keyboards and things like that. Phones have cameras, and I guess your computer has a camera, but you wouldn't carry around and take pictures of things. So different use. And so we have to make sense, but we wanted to get a sense that when you opened Evernote on a device you hadn't used it on before, it felt familiar, and you already kind of knew what it should do and where to find things.
Okay.
You didn't have to learn it all over again. And that's what we talk about when we say consistent and coherent. We want it to make sense, and we want to have familiarity everywhere that you go. And you're going to see that as the apps roll out, that while they look different in terms of their layout and what we present to you, because we have lots of screen real estate or less screen real estate, et cetera, the nav system is always consistent, and it always looks and feels kind of the same, making sense for the form factor that you're in, et cetera. That was job one.
Okay.
Job two was we want to change how we develop software, because we wanted to develop more code reuse so that we were only writing things once, because we wanted to be able to innovate and not have to build things 5 times, which is what we used to have to do. Everything we built 5 times. And we also wanted to do that so that we could fix once and fix everywhere. When there was a bug, because it's software and there are always bugs, if we fix it, we think we fix it everywhere. And the last thing we wanted to do was, re-architect our infrastructure, because it was aging. And we were starting to have some scale issues, and we wanted to get to a more modern architecture. So I can't answer why we didn't do Linux before, but one of the things I could observe is the way we used to do things. If we wanted to do Linux, we would have to spin up an entire Linux team dedicated to Linux. Literally, if we had 5 devices we supported, Linux would be a 6th. You would
I
add
see.
20% more people.
I see.
Just to build that version for Linux, because there was nothing you could take and say, well, this is 3/4 of what I need. Now I have to put the 1/4 on top of it that makes sense for Linux. And I could ship this in a Linux context. Now that we've changed how we do software development, it becomes possible for us to think about actually releasing a Linux version, that will look very much like the Mac and the Windows versions. Once we're at a point that we're happy with the Mac and Windows versions, we'll look at Linux. But from our standpoint, it's now, because of one of those changes in the way we think about software and the amount of code that we reuse. Obviously, we can't reuse everything. I mean, what we do on a platform basis for a Windows machine and a Mac are very different. What we do for a mobile phone are completely different. So there is still lots of code that is specific to the devices, but there's now a much larger core that we can lift and shift to a platform and then wrap it in ways that make sense for that platform, adapt it, etc. Like, at the very basis, the same editor code is literally now running on your phone as on your laptop.
Oh.
The UX is obviously completely different because your laptop has a big screen and your phone has a small one. All the elements are common, so it'll be familiar. We have to redesign and rebuild the UX. But the core of the editor is literally the same code. So if we have a problem and we fix it, we'll fix it everywhere. And that's, those kinds of things mean it becomes possible for us to think about supporting Linux without it being a massive undertaking when you say, oh, well, is the cost of that worthwhile? The cost is much lower now.
And of course, you're not going to tell me when, right?
I'm not going to tell you when. I will say we're going to focus on Mac and Windows and making sure those are where we want them to be, and then we will get Linux out.
Okay.
We have to focus first on the clients that we have and making sure that we're completely happy with them as we get them into market, because we're always a company our scale, when you put software into market, you always find things that no matter how long you have been testing, you didn't find. I mean, we've had the iOS app in customers' hands for 9 months. And, literally it was December or January when we put the very earliest preview out to get feedback on to a limited number of customers. And still, as soon as we, shipped it and we were out, Apple says the maximum number of users you can beta with in iOS is 10,000. They don't let you go to 10,001 no matter what. And the moment, we launched to, 1% of our audience, we immediately learned things that we hadn't learned in 9 months. It wasn't for lack of trying. It's just the way software works. So we have to stabilize everything first, and then we will deal with new platforms.
Yeah. But all the work end up paying out because you just released a new update to iOS very quickly, right?
Yes. So what we're doing right now is working through all the problems that we see in the live and kind of trying to knock them down one at a time. So we're going through these very rapid hotfix releases as we identify problems. In some cases, look, everybody's doing this. If you notice, Apple with iOS 14 has a bunch of problems that they're trying to figure out at the moment. It happens. It's obviously not what any of us want because users get impacted. And, so we scramble to try and fix things as fast as we can. But, none of the problem, the real challenge here is from a user perspective, when you get impacted by a problem, it's enormous. But none of the problems we're seeing are actually massively widespread through the audience. If 50% of our users were having the problem, we would have seen it and fixed it in the beta. We have a set of kind of 1% or less problems right now that we are trying to isolate and fix. but 1% of Evernote users is a heck of a lot of users. So that's a lot of people who are justifiably unhappy, and we have to fix things.
I see. Well, this all comes to a question. I also asked to my followers if they had any questions. Of course, they had all crazy questions for you that I'm not going through because you're not going to answer me. But there's one question that a frequent question that ended up in a lot of questions that I kind of relate to. You said from the very beginning that the web version would be the foundations for all the versions, and to today there are still missing some features there. So what are we talking here about? The new versions for Mac and Windows and the future Linux one is less features, because there are less features than we had before.
So I'd say a couple of things. So we've always said from the beginning that the web is not a bad place to look if you want to understand where we're going. That's different than it being the foundation for all of the versions. The web implementation shares a lot of the code that we use in other releases as well, but it's not the same as it being the foundation. So we start from a very basic thing, right? People expect that you can use Evernote offline when you're not connected to the internet. Well, you can't do that with a web version. The web version only works if you're talking to the internet.
Okay.
So we can start right there and say, right from the beginning, definitionally, there are some significant differences between the Mac and the Windows version and the web version, just starting with the fact that the Mac and the Windows version let you work offline when you're not connected to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing is true for iOS version, and the same thing will be true for Android version. And so people shouldn't focus on the web version being the foundation. It's not. It's one manifestation of the common code. So there are things right now today that aren't supported in the web version that are actually supported in the Mac and Windows versions that actually just went out this morning. An easy example is like multi-select. So you can select a bunch of notes and operate on them. That's not actually supported in the web version, but you will discover marvelously that it is supported in the Mac and Windows version.
I would love that on the web version.
maybe that will come to the web version. But it's not like if it's not there, it won't be here. That's not necessarily.
So my mistake, simple. Because I thought that was what you were talking about. I have to watch for the third time all the videos because that's what I thought.
It's not that simple that it's just if it's not there, it's not going to be anywhere. That's not true. And there are features, yes, that we haven't implemented yet. One of the examples is that we know is popular with some people in the workflow is the ability to edit the creation date of a note.
Me.
Super high on people's priority list.
I'm a little mad now, but it's okay. I'm guessing that's going to come back.
Not on the web, not in Mac and Windows that shipped this morning, but should be out in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
So it's all stacked up and coming.
Okay.
And that's the kind of issue where for some people the answer will be, well, this is unusable. And then I'll say, okay, keep using the legacy version of your Mac or Windows. And we'll get there, right? For a lot of people, they're like, what? There's a feature that lets you do that? That's in the category of it's a 5% feature, a 1% feature. Like fewer than 5% of Evernote users use it. But the ones who do, it's critical to their work path. So we'll get there, we'll implement it. So there are more things on Mac and Windows today than what you can see in the web. In some cases, some of that stuff will move to the web as well, and you'll see it in both places. Okay. In some cases, it won't. Sometimes it depends on what we can and can't do in different contexts. But yeah, they're not carbon copies of each other.
Great.
It's the same core adapted to the platform, and then with stuff that makes sense for that platform as well.
Okay, that's great. So I have now a bunch of questions that I'm sure you're not going to answer, but I'm going to just list them here just so to let you know what is in people's mind. Of course, you know because you talk with a lot of people, but I have a lot of questions about note taking. So free drawing in any part of the note, simultaneously note editing, change the background color. That I never heard before, but change the background color of a note, more options for reminders like recurrent reminders, AI, and a lot. Can you at least talk about one or two or something here?
I guess I could say yes. We'll be doing some of those things.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
But look, I one of the reasons I don't like talking about futures too much is I'm really focused on the present, and I'm really focused on delivering these apps and creating this platform, and on making sure that these apps are not just replacements for people's existing apps, but are really upgrades for the vast majority of our users, and that they see things are better, and we have work to do there still. And so I know everybody wants to focus on what's coming. Um, and what I will say is there are several big things under development that get to that idea I talked to before about moving just from remembering things to accomplishing things.
I love that.
And they've been under development now for, in some cases, I'd say development. They've been under design and development and research for, probably more than 6 months as we've been working on this. And they're all in development now, trying to get there. My expectation, and I've said this publicly now in a number of forums, is my expectation is that in the next 12 months we will ship more than we've shipped in the last 5 years. And that sounds like a bold statement. It's not actually that bold a statement when you can see the stuff in flight behind the scenes like I can. So I know that is actually a true statement. I have complete faith that is going to be true. But I don't want to talk about it's going to be this feature or that feature or the other feature. What I will say is all of those things that you just talked about are things that we're aware of, that we're thinking about. And our biggest focus is really on looking at things that a large population of our user base is already using Evernote in some way to do, but that, we don't make it easy or we don't support it very well. And
where do you look for them? The forums?
The forums, customer research, surveys, everywhere. I mean, we have a lot of research about what users do. Once in a while, people will get surveys from us that say, "Oh, which of the following things are important?" It's like, and those surveys, like the forums are great, but there's a small number of people in the forums who are very passionate about the thing that they want. The surveys let us go out to 100,000 people, or 200,000 or 300,000 users, and get their what's most important to you, this, that, and the other. So that gives us this very large quantitative base of information to say, oh, look, 40% of our users use Evernote to do this. Do we support that as well as we could, or can we make that better? And so, and then we go out into direct user research once we have an area to say, we want to talk to users who are doing this kind of thing and see what you're doing and think about how we can make it better. And then we go from this big sort of level of quantitative survey research into one-on-one meetings with users to say, show us how you use Evernote to do this.
Oh, very interesting.
And we literally learn from individual users, and we go looking at 20, 30, 40 individual users, start to collect that information, come up with some ideas, and then go back and start presenting ideas to users saying, if we did this, would that make your life easier? Would you use this? Would you not use this? How is this right? How is this wrong? And that's the entire process we go through.
That's
to
really
actually
nice.
Identify what to work on and design it and develop it.
I got one of those surveys about images. I love the questions. The questions were great.
We're interested in what people are doing with images, because
Yeah,
there are a lot of images in Evernote, and
really nice.
yeah.
Oh, and like talking about community, I do miss the international conference. Oh, that was. I love that. Going there was really nice. Hope someday we can get at least a online one again. Now that we are online.
Coronavirus style, that might be what it comes down to. But
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we could get past coronavirus and we could all start traveling again and actually see people face to face. Because I mean, video conferencing is great, but it's not quite the same as being with people in the same place.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for all the answers, and especially thank you very much for all the work you've been doing for the community. Thank you. Really, really thank you for that.
And more than happy to be here and talk with you, and more than happy to do it again. I'm hoping that over the coming months we'll have more and more things to talk about, and that's the goal, is to go from sort of we've been quiet for a long time, start actually starting to move new things out into the world. So I'm looking forward to that part too.
See you soon.
All right, take care.
Take care.